On a quiet Christmas night in 1996, inside a beautiful Boulder, Colorado home, a secret horror was unfolding, one that would grip the world for decades. By morning, 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey, a child beauty queen with a bright smile and glittering pageant crowns, would be reported missing. Hours later, she'd be found dead in the very house she was supposedly taken from. A chilling ransom note, a frantic 911 call, a basement discovery, and an investigation that spiraled into chaos turned this tragedy into one of the most infamous, unsolved cases in American history. In this video, we're going to walk step by step through the JonBenét Ramsey case. What happened that night, what the evidence shows, the different theories, and how this mystery still remains officially unsolved nearly 3 decades later. This isn't about sensationalism. It's about carefully examining a case that continues to raise disturbing questions about justice, media, and the truth. Before we dive into the twists, suspects, and theories, we need to understand who JonBenét Ramsey was and why her death shook the world. JonBenét was a 6-year-old girl, the daughter of John and Patsy Ramsey, a wealthy family living in an affluent Boulder neighborhood. She was involved in child beauty pageants, often photographed in elaborate costumes and makeup, images that would later be splashed across every news broadcast and magazine cover. This case sits at the crossroads of crime, media, and public perception. It's not just about what happened in that basement. It's also about how the investigation unfolded, how the Ramseys were treated, and how early mistakes may have permanently damaged the hunt for the truth. In this documentary, we'll move chronologically through the night of the crime, the early investigation, key pieces of evidence, major theories, and where things stand today. Let's begin with Christmas night, 1996. The story begins on December 25, 1996. The Ramsey family, John, Patsy, their 9-year-old son Burke, and 6-year-old JonBenét, spent Christmas Day celebrating, visiting friends, and attending a party at a nearby home. By all accounts, it was an ordinary, festive holiday. That evening, they returned to their Boulder house. The children were reportedly tired. JonBenét was carried to bed. The family settled in for the night. In the early hours of December 26th, sometime between late night and dawn, something went terribly wrong inside that house. Officially, no one outside the family claims to have seen or heard anything unusual. No neighbors reported screams. No one reported a break-in. Yet by morning, a 3-page ransom note would be discovered, and a frantic 911 call would summon police to the scene. Whatever happened in that time window, between Christmas celebrations and the morning panic, remains the heart of this mystery. Around 5:30 a.m. on December 26th, Patsy Ramsey reportedly woke up, intending to make coffee and start the day for a planned family trip. On the back staircase, she says she discovered a handwritten 3-page ransom note laid out on the steps. The note claimed that JonBenét had been kidnapped by a small foreign faction and demanded $118,000 in cash, an oddly specific amount matching a recent bonus John had received. Panicked, Patsy screamed for John and called 911 at 5:52 a.m., reporting a kidnapping. Police responded quickly, but from the beginning, the scene was mishandled. Friends were invited to the house for support, multiple people walked through key areas, and the home was not locked down as a potential crime scene. The ransom note itself, its length, bizarre phrasing, and apparent familiarity with the Ramseys, would become one of the most heavily scrutinized pieces of evidence in the entire case. When Boulder police arrived, they initially treated the case as a kidnapping, not a murder. Officers conducted only a limited search of the home, focusing mostly on points of entry and common areas. The basement, where JonBenét's body would later be found, was not thoroughly checked at first. Meanwhile, friends and a family pastor moved in and out of the house, comforting the Ramseys but also unintentionally contaminating potential evidence. Detectives asked John Ramsey to look for anything unusual. Hours into the investigation, around 1 p.m., John and a family friend went to the basement. There, behind a latched door in a small windowless room sometimes called the wine cellar, John discovered JonBenét's body. She was lying on the floor, covered with a blanket, with tape on her mouth and a makeshift garrote around her neck. Instead of leaving the body in place, John carried her upstairs. Understandable emotionally, but devastating for forensic integrity. The autopsy would reveal a complex and deeply disturbing crime. JonBenét had suffered a blow to the head, believed to have caused a severe skull fracture. She had also been strangled with a homemade garrote fashioned from a length of cord and a broken paintbrush handle. There were signs that suggested possible staging, the use of duct tape, the positioning of the body, and the presence of the blanket. There were also controversial findings regarding potential sexual assault. The autopsy reported vaginal irritation and evidence of chronic inflammation, but not definitive proof of a violent sexual attack that night. This ambiguity has fueled endless debate about motive and whether the scene was staged to look like a sexual predator's crime. Toxicology tests found no drugs in her system. The combination of head trauma and strangulation left investigators divided over which occurred first, and what that sequence might say about intent, rage, or cover-up. From the outset, the ransom note stood out as profoundly strange. It was long, about 370 words, far longer than typical real-world ransom notes. It was written on paper from inside the Ramsey home, using a pen from the house. Handwriting analysis suggested it likely took 20 minutes or more to compose. The note referenced movies like Dirty Harry and Speed, used oddly theatrical phrases, and included the unusually specific demand of $118,000. Experts argued over whether the writer was trying to sound foreign, sophisticated, or simply deceptive. Several forensic document examiners concluded the note was probably written by a woman and showed similarities to Patsy Ramsey's handwriting, though no one could say this with absolute certainty. The tone swung between faux professional and melodramatic, undermining its credibility. Many investigators came to believe the note was not a genuine ransom demand, but a staged attempt to misdirect police about what had really happened inside the house. As details of the case emerged, media coverage exploded. The combination of a wealthy family, a beautiful child pageant star, and a shocking murder created a perfect storm for sensationalism. Television networks replayed pageant footage of JonBenét in heavy makeup and sequined costumes, often blurring the line between reporting and spectacle. Early leaks suggested police suspicion of the parents. Talk shows, tabloids, and even mainstream outlets speculated boldly. Were John and Patsy hiding something? Was Burke involved? The family's polished public image, their use of media advisors, and their decision to give certain interviews while avoiding others fueled public doubt. At the same time, Boulder Police and the district attorney's office clashed internally, with differing theories and egos complicating cooperation. The leak-driven coverage distorted facts, embedded early narratives in the public consciousness, and made it nearly impossible to conduct a calm, methodical investigation away from cameras. As the investigation evolved, suspicion increasingly turned toward the Ramsey family themselves. Police noted there were no obvious signs of forced entry. The ransom note came from inside the house. The amount demanded matched John's bonus. And statistically, most child homicides involve someone known to the victim. Investigators developed several possible family-involved scenarios. One theory suggested an accidental death, perhaps from a burst of anger or rough play, followed by a frantic cover-up staged to look like a kidnapping and sexual assault. Another theory focused on Burke, the older brother, speculating that a sibling altercation might have escalated, with parents allegedly covering for him. The Ramseys strongly denied all such accusations. They pointed to unknown DNA on JonBenét's clothing, the possibility of an intruder using a basement window, and their lack of a clear motive. Nevertheless, the family, especially Patsy, remained under a cloud of suspicion in the public eye for years. Opposing the family involvement theories was the intruder hypothesis, the idea that someone outside the household broke in, assaulted and killed JonBenét, then staged the scene. Supporters pointed to an open or disturbed basement window, a suitcase positioned under it, and unidentified male DNA later found on her underwear and leggings. There were also reports of a neighbor hearing a scream, and other neighbors noticing an unfamiliar vehicle. Several known sex offenders and drifters in the area were scrutinized. Over the years, various potential suspects emerged, including an electrician, a housekeeper's relative, and later, the notorious false confessor John Mark Carr. Critics of the intruder theory argue that it's unlikely a stranger would take the time to write a long ransom note inside the house, risk being discovered, and then leave without taking the body. Still, the unidentified DNA remains a stubborn piece of evidence that intruder theory advocates believe cannot be easily dismissed. Forensic evidence in the JonBenét case is both crucial and maddeningly inconclusive. There were fibers, partial footprints, a broken paintbrush used as part of the garrote, and that enigmatic DNA. Touch DNA found on JonBenét's long johns and underwear did not match any family members, suggesting an unknown male. However, critics caution that such DNA could come from manufacturing, packaging, or innocent secondary transfer, not necessarily the killer. The pineapple evidence is another debated detail. Partially digested pineapple was found in JonBenét's stomach, and a bowl of pineapple with Burke's fingerprints was discovered in the kitchen. This suggests she ate after returning home, potentially later than some accounts claim. Unfortunately, early contamination of the crime scene, the movement of the body, and the lack of a strict perimeter weakened the reliability of many forensic traces. Nearly every piece of evidence in this case can be interpreted in multiple, often conflicting ways. In 1999, a Boulder County grand jury reviewed the case. After months of testimony and evidence, the grand jury actually voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges related to child abuse resulting in death and accessory to a crime. However, District Attorney Alex Hunter declined to sign the indictment, stating that the evidence did not meet the threshold for a criminal trial beyond a reasonable doubt. For years, the public didn't even know an indictment had been returned. When it was revealed in 2013, it reignited debate. Had prosecutors protected the Ramseys, or simply acted responsibly, given the weak and circumstantial nature of the case? In 2008, a different DA formally announced that new DNA analysis appeared to exonerate the Ramseys, issuing an apology. Yet some experts contested this, arguing that the DNA evidence was too limited and ambiguous to completely clear anyone. Legally, no Ramsey has ever been charged with JonBenét's murder. As the years passed, the case spawned books, documentaries, tabloid exposés, and countless online discussions. In 2006, John Mark Carr falsely confessed to JonBenét's murder, claiming disturbing details that ultimately didn't match the evidence. His DNA did not match the samples in the case, and he was ruled out. Modern reinvestigations have focused on re-examining DNA with improved technology, reanalyzing the ransom note with advanced linguistic tools, and revisiting old suspects and tips. Boulder authorities say the case remains open, with hundreds of pieces of evidence and thousands of pages of documents. Meanwhile, the cultural legacy of the case is significant. It raised questions about child pageants, media ethics, and how tragedy is consumed as entertainment. It also exposed serious flaws in how complex, high-profile investigations can be derailed by early mistakes, public pressure, and institutional conflict. Yet despite everything, the core question remains painfully simple. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey? Stepping back from the theories and drama, several key takeaways emerge from the JonBenét Ramsey case. First, early investigative mistakes can be nearly impossible to undo. The mishandled crime scene, the movement of the body, and competing law enforcement agendas likely erased or muddled critical evidence. Second, this case illustrates how powerful narratives, suspicious parents versus mysterious intruder, can overshadow nuance. Almost every piece of evidence can be interpreted in opposing ways, depending on what story you already believe. Third, the pervasive media circus shaped public opinion long before all facts were known, turning a complex investigation into nightly entertainment. That damaged not just the Ramseys, but possibly the pursuit of truth. Finally, there's the human cost. A 6-year-old girl lost her life, and nearly 30 years later, no one has been held accountable. Whether the killer was inside or outside that house, this remains a haunting example of justice delayed, and perhaps justice denied. If you've made it this far, you know how complex the JonBenét Ramsey case really is, far beyond tabloid headlines or simple answers. I'm not here to tell you definitively who did it. No one outside law enforcement has the full case file, and even they haven't solved it. But thoughtful discussion can still matter. In the comments, share your perspective. Do you lean toward an intruder theory, some form of family involvement, or an explanation we haven't fully considered? Which pieces of evidence feel most convincing or most misleading to you? If you found this deep dive helpful and want more long-form, carefully researched true crime breakdowns, consider subscribing, turning on notifications, and sharing this video with someone who follows unsolved cases. Your engagement helps push this kind of nuanced content above the noise of quick, sensational takes. Most importantly, remember that at the center of all this was a real child. As we analyze, we owe JonBenét and every victim our empathy and respect.